started. Thank you all for joining the July meeting today. I'm on the wrong agenda. Give me 1 second. We actually have a pretty slim agenda, which is great. We have met quorum in the room, and so there is no voting item, but we can have participation on the phone. You know, that's always the worry. And so, yeah, we can go ahead and get started. I anticipate that we'll be done by 8:30 today. So to start off, actually, I'm going to hand it over to Marco to talk about our recording process. And guys, we're actually, this regulation has changed slightly, but we're staying the same. And Marco will explain.
Yes. So before I get into that, I'll just go through the procedures. So again, good evening. My name is Marco Rivero. I am the staff liaison to the Park and Recreation Commission, and welcome to our July meeting. I would like to remind our attendees that the PRC meeting will be recorded, and that has begun. We ask that commissioners, presenters, and attendees please mute your microphones and turn off your video feeds if you are not speaking. For those attending via telephone, you can unmute and mute yourselves with the microphone by dialing *6. The top toolbar contains a raise your hand function in case a commission member or presenter has a question during the meeting. Commissioners and presenters may share their screens using the share content box. The chat box will also be checked routinely, but again, it's mainly to address logistical questions or issues during the meeting. During the public comment period and during the agenda items discussion, the chair will recognize virtual participation first. I believe we have Dean on the line for the commission, and then in-person attendees will be able to comment. As way of information, we'll be holding a public comment period at the beginning of the meeting. Each public commenter will have up to 3 minutes for their comments. I will signal to the speaker once the time is up. So again, speaking on regards to the recording, it is now no longer mandatory for our commission to have recordings of our meetings. However, we will continue the practice of recording our meetings and providing the video feed recording on our website. So
basically, they said it's optional. So now we don't run the risk of having like meeting room problems when we run with the sports commission and stuff like that.
Right.
But we're going to continue to do it because personally, I find it very valuable. Like, okay, cool. And Mark and I talked about. We also think it amps up the respect level, professionalism level a little bit. By stating that we're all going to be recorded, you know, makes it a little bit more official. So, it's really not, but like I think we're not going to do bad things. Yeah, we're recording right now.
Shouldn't have said that.
I know. So the regulation has changed, but our practices will not.
Will remain the same.
But we'll maintain some flexibility for those joint meetings, which I think is good. Yeah, since we had problems last time too. Yeah.
And with that, Shruti.
Okay, thank you. Great. All right. So I have nothing else to start us off with today, so we can head right into public comment.
Oh, the minutes for.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay. All right. Yeah, we'll go ahead and approve the June meetings. Did anyone have any comments or any questions about them? I didn't. All right, great. Well, then we will go ahead and say that they're approved. All right, now we will move to public comment then. We have 2 public commenters tonight.
Yes, I believe we have one in the room right now. So we will begin with Mary Glass.
Thank you. I'm Mary Glass. I am chair of the CivFed's Environmental Affairs Committee and a member of the Arlington Tree Action Group, but I'm speaking tonight on my own behalf, not on theirs. First of all, I want to commend this group for the letter that they sent in commenting on the Forestry and Natural Resources Plan. I thought it was very insightful and, you know, got down to a lot of good specifics on improvements that could be made. I think especially your increased commitment to more resources to fund the things that they were talking about, recognizing the importance of natural resources and really raising that priority in county discussions. And also recognizing the significance of the volunteer workers who are doing a lot, especially with trees in this area, as Jill knows well. But I personally have a lot of problems with the document. I think it's confusing and repetitive, and it's not the kind of strategic document we need. We need something that's much simpler and lays out the priorities in order. And then we can have an implementation plan that gets down to the kind of detail that we have in that plan. And it needs to have a better sense of urgency. this is a big problem. And I brought with me a reference to the new tree canopy study that's just been completed, funded by citizens. And this shows that the Arlington tree canopy is not the 40% they talk about in the report. It is 33%. And if you have any questions, this can all be verified. But knowing that changes the whole dynamic of that plan. And so to let it go without this urgency and resources just shows a sort of just ignoring with the reality of what's happening, what we need to do. The idea that we might be able to maintain 40% is out of the question. They've done an analysis of planting areas. If you plant every plantable area in Arlington, you can only get to 39%. And more importantly, we have aging forests and really going to need a lot more maintenance. But there's been a positive outcome of the whole thing. And that is that we had formed this new Arlington Consortium for Tree Sustainability. And just as you're talking about the great work of volunteers, the whole purpose of this, and it's going to be mainly a website, will be to bring together all the people who are already doing great things like Jill and connect them up with other people who can provide ideas. They can ask for help through this website. And we'll try to get some experts to also do some Zoom sessions for us to do some training. But the main point is that we have so much here and we can't wait. Some of us feel a sense of urgency. So we're going to try to do it, through this consortium. So we welcome your participation and your comments.
Thank you very much. Just to react to that real quick, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today. I think we would like to stay involved with how we can back up and support the work that you're doing. So I think specifically if there are moments that involve any sort of board outlook, we would love to have you back, maybe to speak on an item or inform us of what you guys are doing and we can respond in a coordinated approach potentially. I just want to maintain that open communication.
Oh, I meant to mention, I'm not giving everyone one of these wildly expensive. But I brought them in case you'd like to look at them. Somehow, rather than looking at my computer, when I looked at this, it seemed much more sensible. I could understand what they were trying to say. So I'll pass these around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary. Thank you, Mary.
We were expecting to have another public comment manager, but she is not on the line or in person. So I guess.
Am I allowed to say what she was gonna say?
Yeah, and I think we can also have, I think that's fine. And then we can also, if she does come back, we can always have her speak again. Yeah,
So
go ahead.
I spoke to Portia Clark this week. She's the president of the Green Valley Civic Association. And there's a new rehab park in their area, and she is very interested in getting restroom facilities put in there. It's a BIPOC neighborhood, and they're feeling a little bit, I'm paraphrasing too much, but they're feeling like they're being neglected. However, to her credit, she's identified an alternative that's temporary and a source of funding, but all she needs is for the county to allow them to put this bathroom facility. It's better than a porta potty, but it's not a permanent bathroom. I don't know what the details are, but anyway, so that's what she was going to ask us about.
And just for some additional background, Jill has made inroads with Portia, and if this is an issue, we would love to have her come in public comment, but potentially this being an equity issue, I think it would be something that we would consider writing a letter about as well, especially since it's a permitting choice that we fully can push the board on.
I'm sorry.
No, and Portia seems cool, basically, and we should foster that relationship.
Is it that I think it's called a Throne? It's a company that makes these really souped up porta potties that are really nice.
I think I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Locally owned business. Somebody in Green Valley actually
Okay.
runs the business or at least they have another one in that area.
Okay.
That's how they got the connection.
Okay.
And there's a source of funding for the maintenance and initial. So all they need is for the county.
And we know that there's a historic problem with citing facilities like this in underserved communities due to worries about urban sprawl and other more racist problems as well. So yeah, I think this is something that we would like to attack. Yeah. Okay, hopefully Portia, we can have her come to a separate meeting, but,
I think that's on Leeds.
okay, cool. Oh, right,
Thanks
okay,
for looking at that.
yes, yeah, thank you, Jill. Thank you for bringing it to us, and I hope, let's keep pushing Portia to come here. Yeah. I can help too. All right, well, we're gonna move it over to our basically only agenda item for today, which is great. We're having a staff presentation and discussion on the site plan conditions and site plan review committee process. So we talked about we wrote a letter on the changes earlier this year, I wanna say, yeah. And staff's now coming back to us, basically giving another primer. And this is so, especially for our newer members as well. But I'm gonna ask, and so we have Matt here to help us to present on this topic. And my question to you, I think it'll be at the end, is like, next steps, basically.
Sure.
What can we do here to push us forward? Because I think it's good primer education for all of us as to where changes are coming and all that jazz, but
Mhm.
I wanna make sure that we're also being mindful of what we need to do.
Thank you very much, Shruti. This was, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here this evening to see all of you in person. I think I probably exchanged emails with probably almost all of you. Yeah, would you like me to sit here?
Yeah.
Or at the table?
Yeah.
I can scoot up
I
if you-
take my place over here.
you're okay with
That's
this.
more
Yeah,
room.
I think we're okay. I think we're okay.
All
No,
right.
sorry about that.
No worries. Let me go ahead
All
and
right.
share my screen.
There's room for everyone.
If there is issue. Thank you.
Coming up shortly.
Yep.
Here we go. Great. So, as I said, thanks for having me this evening. I'd love to give this talk. And like I said, I think I probably exchanged emails with probably all of them when we're putting together SPRC rosters. And so it's nice to kind of put names with faces. But for a more formal introduction, my name is Matt Pfeiffer. I am in the Department of Community Planning, Housing and Development. I'm the site plan review supervisor. So I manage the team that are the project managers on the individual site plan projects. So you probably all of you know all of the members of my team. So it's Adam Watson, Peter Schultz, Courtney Badger, Kevin Lamb, and our newest sort of new member, Chrissy Wallentish, who worked for the county, for our team for a number of years, went over to the private sector, and now she's back in her old job. So it's a good team. So I'm going to go through this presentation, and as we'll say, a lot of this is focused on sort of like a primer or an educational kind of tone to it, where I'll try to explain a lot of terms and explain a lot of processes and why we do what we do. And then the last couple of slides, I'm actually going to turn it over to Marco to talk about how the public park planning processes, because there are multiple processes, intersect with site plans and kind of how that whole relationship works.
And this is my first time on the commission, so.
I don't know if you know Marco. Marco, former CPHT employee.
right.
He and I used to work together on the use permit team way back.
That's right.
I know he looks young, but so the items that we'll go through in this presentation, as I said, I'll talk about what are site plans and site plan conditions. I'm just going to give a very brief, bare bones overview of the SPRC process. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the post-approval permitting process, because I think that is something that is less well known by a lot of our appointed commissioners. And then finally, again, I'll turn it over to Marco to talk about the public space planning process. So site plans. So what are site plans? The Code of Virginia enables localities to require special exception permits for a wide variety of uses and building forms. And special exception actually can pertain to either conditional zoning, where it is something that requires special permission to do subject to conditions that mitigate the impact of the use. And, you know, we call those use permits in Arlington. Other places call them special use permits. And But what is unique to Arlington is that we have a site plan process. There are, most of the rest of the Commonwealth does things a bit differently than we do. So we have special enabling legislation that allows us to do incentive zoning. So the special exception site plan is the tool that we use to implement incentive zoning. So what that means is that the site plan development is allowed to be proposed at a density, intensity that are above the by right standards of the zoning ordinance in order to implement county goals and policies. So if you're familiar, we have a lot of sector plans and comprehensive plan elements that have various goals and objectives and recommendations. And so the site plan is the primary tool for implementing those goals and recommendations through this incentive of increased density. Now, along with that is the legal ability for the board to modify zoning standards, again, related to density, building placement, use, height, all of these kind of things, building form and placement, parking, and other aspects of the development. So that's what a site plan is. If you were an applicant and you were filing an application for a site plan, the main component of that application, there's a lot of legal documents that are involved in it, but the main component of that is a set of what we call site plan drawings. The site plan drawings consist of three main component parts, although sometimes there's more. Those are civil engineering plans, architectural plans, and conceptual landscape plans. And then again, the application will have other types of elements such as sustainability documentation, multimodal transportation assessments, and things of that nature. But the site plan drawings are when we think of the site plan, it's the drawings. And those kind of show what the proposed development is. So at the end of the site plan process, those are approved by the board and they are regulatory. So if the board approves the civil plans and it shows a building that's set back 15 feet from the edge of from the face of curb, that's regulatory. They have to do that. That's the law. Site plan conditions. Site plan conditions are also legal instruments that, along with the drawings, regulate land use, development statistics, features, amenities, mitigations, building site operations, construction activities, and permitting processes. So we have 52 standard site plan conditions. And the majority of those, as I mentioned, those are regulating activities during construction. They're talking about required permitting processes. But we also have conditions that regulate development statistics, like, for example, here is your parking ratio that you have to provide. So, the drawings will show here's your garage and here's the layout of the garage, and the condition will regulate here is the ratio. So you have to provide 0.8 spaces per residential unit. Now you could come in post-approval and change that around based on, maybe I want to add a couple of more spaces to the G2 level and take away a couple of spaces on the G1 level. And that's fine as long as you're providing that ratio that the board approved.
Or probably like a separate transportation study too. Is that another way to change that? As like as part of the site plan. Sometimes we see that happening, where they look at like the ingress and exits of all things and adjust parking based on that. Is that possible?
Not exactly. So the parking ratio would be an approved statistic that is an element that can't be changed unless you go back to the county board to get it changed.
I'm asking because our preference is always to push down that ratio,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have lots of policy plans in effect to try to implement lower parking ratios and build an appropriate amount of parking.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly.
So just a quick,
Sure.
So you said 52 site plan conditions. How often are those conditions evaluated and changed? And does it require the board to approve all 52 of them?
So we have a set of standard site plan conditions, and the list of standard site plan conditions is not in and of itself regulatory. It's just the baseline that we use when we have a site plan application, we will take that baseline and say, we're, these are the conditions that we're going to use, and let's talk, you and me applicant, let's go through this list and determine what's applicable and what's not applicable. Let's change things to make sure that it fits the specific project. Sometimes not all of the language is going to be applicable to a specific project, or you may look at a project and say, we need a certain site-specific condition for this issue that's been identified, in SPRC or something like that. So the standard conditions are just that. They're just the baseline that we use. And then the conditions are always shaped and molded to suit a specific project. And so when the board approves the project, they're approving the set of conditions that has been shaped and molded to fit that project.
Okay, so on one hand, it sounds very wishy-washy and obviously subject to a lot of, who's in the room kind of situations. But it kind of seems to be similar to how APS handles their ed specs. Every project seems to have its own specs. There's certain things that they kind of, but there often is they tailor or they change the ed specs to the school they're building. I'm not sure if that's common, throughout the country, that kind of stuff. That does seem to me to be, on the one hand, it allows for flexibility, but on the other hand, it also allows for some kind of
Unequal treatment.
yeah.
I think I'm not particularly concerned about unequal treatment because again, every site plan is unique, right? And so, for example, we have a lot of site plans that have like our standard conditions that have fill in the blanks, right? So you might say, here's the standard language, and then there are a bunch of blanks, fill in the streetscape dimensions. Or, we have our public art condition that has fill in the blank. What is the monetary contribution going to be? And that's all reviewed by staff. It's reviewed by the SPRC. It's reviewed, a recommendation is given to the board by the planning commission, and everyone sees those conditions, and everyone, the planning commission will review that. And if they don't like it, they can make a motion and recommend to the board that that be changed. And oftentimes that does happen,
So a lot of these things are just having it, not necessarily specifically what it has to be, like the parking.
Right. So that's one example, but we also often do have like what we call site-specific conditions. So you can have as many as like 10 site-specific conditions depending on various issues. Like for example, let's say we have a site plan that is going to implement, we're going to have them build on-street parking meters, right? So we would develop a condition that said, you're going to build parking meters, and you're going to show it on your civil engineering plan, and they're going to be along this stretch of the street, right? So it's those types of things. Every project is different. The public infrastructure that's being delivered with these projects is always different. And so we have to, come up with the right conditions and the right regulations for that specific project. I think you can almost think of site plans as almost like a site-specific zoning ordinance. And so it's going to be different at every site.
Can you give us a rundown? I don't know if this is the wrong time, maybe I should wait till the end. But I'd love to hear a rundown from your point of view about how the tree canopy fund gets its money. What are the site plan conditions with respect to the number of trees? And then what would create the situation where the developer would pay money into the tree canopy fund instead of putting the trees? Just explain that in one.
I will try to explain that, and I think I do have the standard set of conditions up, so I could reference it if need be. But essentially, the conceptual landscape plan, or sometimes it's part of the civil plans, but in any case, the drawings will show trees that are to be conserved on the site, or trees that are planted. And our standard site plan condition that says that within 3 years of either the planting of the tree, I think it's the delivery of the landscape plan. If those trees die then they have to pay, I think, $2,400 per tree into the tree canopy fund.
I don't. Maybe we should talk offline.
Yeah.
I think they have to pay up front. I think there's a certain number of trees that they don't have, that if they can't meet that
Well,
requirement,
there
then
are,
they have to pay up front. Because they also have to pay a bond.
Mhm.
And if the bond, if the tree dies, then the bond is what's tapped. So I don't think they're paying, I always thought they were paying because they could not provide the minimum that
So
the county was,
that's actually,
that's in the site plan.
that's a different, actually, it's part of the same condition, but that's actually a different calculation. So there's a calculation that gets done by Vincent Furway and his team
Yeah.
when we were reviewing site plans.
Yeah.
And so if they're going to, say there are, 100 trees on site, if they're going to remove 50 of them, then they go through a calculation based on, was it Marco, like the species, the
Yes.
caliper size, the health, all this kind of stuff. So they have to do a calculation. And then they have, I think there are options, and I can't remember exactly where this is regulated. I think it's in the county code.
I believe it is,
Yeah,
yes.
so it's not necessarily a site plan issue. It's more of a code issue. Although it is referenced in the site plan conditions, but there's tree replacement. There's a tree replacement formula whereby they either have to, they come up with a calculation based on the trees that are being removed. And so say maybe they're removing 50 trees that are in bad health, that comes out to, they need to replace 30 trees, right? Based on the formula. They can either replace them on site, replace them, I think, nearby off site, or pay into the fund. So they have that option.
Oh, so the baseline, the site plan condition, if you will,
Yeah.
is they can't take down any trees. And then when they are
Or
taking
they
down,
do any
well, no,
remedies.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
base.
Right.
Don't
Right.
take down any trees. Okay, we're gonna take down trees. Okay, then you have to replace X number, and if you can't, then you have to.
Yeah.
That's how. it
And then
works?
additionally, any plantings that they had that aren't viable don't succeed.
Within
because of
3 years.
About,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, then they
Then
have.
they
the
also
bonding
pay.
fee.
And
Which
then
is good.
as what Matt was saying, I think that's a separate part of the condition, but that's listed within, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that's not code, that's probably just the condition,
The
the bonding.
the bonding and the replacement if the trees die,
Yeah,
that's part of the condition.
Right.
The other part, I think, is part of the code, but I'm not 100% on that. And so I would actually, before I say something that's not true, I would say, let me go back and talk with Vincent. And
Yeah.
he's probably the best
well,
person to
I've
answer
talked to
that question.
Vincent several
Yeah.
times, and still, like,
Yeah.
it helps me to hear it from different
Yeah.
perspectives, so I won't hold you to it.
The question
Sure.
too on the same vein. Did it specify what kind of trees, like if they, fir dies, they replace with Bradford pear or something invasive, like that's not good, right? So is it, what kind of trees can be replaced is also regulated?
So in the tree replacement calculations, I don't know if it gets into species, but it may get into like, there's a certain point score for a canopy tree versus an ornamental, right? So 3 points for a canopy, 2 points for an ornamental, so something along those lines. But again, before I say something that's not
And in our
accurate.
guidelines that we
Yeah.
worked on earlier this year, we recommended.
Okay.
And I was gonna say too, all of this is also part of that collective effort to coordinate also with our urban forestry division and office, so that if there is any sort of discrepancy with the kind of trees that are being used or considerations that are being made during that site plan review process, obviously Vincent or his team would be involved in trying to clarify what would be acceptable.
So, I mean, sorry, can I just say one
Yeah,
more
no,
thing?
yeah.
It kind of, you'll think it's a tangent, but I've noticed around Arlington that there are an awful lot of crepe myrtles. And in some old properties, which I think should be replaced with whenever those places get redeveloped. But so I guess it's just something to keep in mind that, we've got a lousy set of trees there now, and we want to get a better.
So are non-native trees
Yeah,
count against your score?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does that work on your
Yeah.
score? I mean,
And that would be a
that's something
specific,
to really
yeah.
think through.
Or even like, I'm thinking about, when we're looking at it, just as, when we're sitting at the table at an SPRC and one of these site plans come up that look on paper pretty dense, but are full of bad trees, we have to hammer in on that. That's something that we have
Absolutely.
the expertise to hammer in on, to say like, your replacement project should include this for the right reasons. You should do it pro bono, please. Yeah.
Its office definitely reviews all this.
Absolutely.
Extensive.
On the landscape plan.
Because yeah, whenever I'm at these meetings, they're like, oh, we don't have the lids of species list yet. I'm like, okay, well,
Right.
try to like.
Yeah.
They even also review how it aligns with the civil engineering plan as well. So that there's a lot of coordination that goes amongst the various plans.
Which is good that it's the same group,
Yes.
right? To
Yes.
do all that check.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, getting back to what we're talking about today, was focusing on should we expect that when we have the SPRC that the species that is there, or like, how do we make sure that we have the tools we need to be able to do our job?
So they are required to provide tree replacement calculations with either their, like I said, sometimes the tree replacement plan sheets are provided with the conceptual landscape plan. Sometimes they're provided with the civil plan. It's kind of just.
So that all
how
falls
they
within
do it, but-
SPRC, right? So.
But those are available to the public, but those are draft. So because this is a code requirement, that's one of the things that's actually not going to be regulatory with the site plan because it's a code requirement. And so, but it is provided as a draft for people to review with the site plan.
And, but that calculation, like you said, that calculation may not be down to the species level, right? But it would have the ornamental versus blah, blah, like all the different.
Yeah, so what it'll show, so they'll, okay. So the tree.
I mean, I think it'd even be
Yeah.
cool to have an example of what that would look like, what that calculation would look like. So when we ask for it, we
Right.
know what we're asking.
Yeah. So they'll have sheets that show, here's an inventory of every tree on site and here's our score, right?
Right.
So they'll do that calculation. Vincent will review that many times. Vincent and Jose will look at that and they'll be like, oh, they did this wrong. They need to fix this.
But in draft, that's still
Yeah,
public
draft.
available?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just on page 40 of the CC.
Okay, I never looked at it.
Oh, I
Right, I
so
never
you
looked.
never get that.
60,
bit.
oh, depending on the site plan project, you
Yeah.
can be looking at hundreds of sheets.
I mean, yeah, exactly, page 40,
Yeah.
no, it's there,
Deep.
because they show all the trees on the
I
drawing.
looked at it,
They
yeah.
have to show every tree where they're putting it on their civil drawings, and that's page 2 or 3. The actual calculations is like way deep in.
And
all
they,
these
they're
tables.
good on that drawing, right? And they're bad at the calculation usually.
So
probably,
that's
right?
the thing, so
Yeah.
they will provide the draft calculation. Now, in terms of the actual planting plans, we don't require them to specify species
Right.
on the conceptual landscape plan. And I know that's a bone of contention with some people, but
Us.
we don't. we-
Got a letter.
And let me actually go to the next slide,
Let me
because
get it,
actually,
yeah.
I'm gonna get into this.
Okay.
This is actually a really good segue. So, we have, let me just back up a little bit and say, we have a document called the Administrative Regulation 4.1 that I am actually in the midst of completely tossing the old one and rewriting this because it's badly out of date.
Cool.
I actually hope to have that work completed by the end of the summer. But in any case, this document has standards for the submission of the conceptual landscape plan drawings, and all the plan drawings, but I'll just go into conceptual landscape plan drawings because I think that's what this group is probably most interested in. So what is required to be provided on those drawings? You have to show your streetscapes, dimensions, and all on-site open spaces in relation to the proposed and above and below grade structures and utilities. You also have to show proposed grading. You have to show open space easement areas, including a labeling of sizes. You have to show planting details, including specifications of major types of plants. So you don't have to put species at this stage, but you do have to say, this is a canopy tree, this is an ornamental tree, this is an evergreen, this is ground cover ornamental. Right, exactly. You have to tell us broad, categories, hardscape material specifications. This is gonna be brick, pavers, things like that. And then street furnishings, like this is gonna be a bench, this is gonna be a trash can. You don't have to tell us exactly what it looks like at this stage. That will come later.
At the time of this plan, the engineering drawings are available.
Yes.
What we're running across is we see the landscape plan and then after things have been approved, we're in the post-site approval process, they say, son of a gun, the engineering drawings don't let us put a tree there.
Yeah.
Who knew that we're building a multi-million-dollar building and didn't think to look under the ground?
Right,
So that
Right.
upsets us.
sure, sure.
But that can't be
That's-
fair. That, I mean, how on earth can you not know that?
That's a conflict as old as time.
Really? I mean,
Like,
it's just like, what's
yeah.
underground? Or-
Well, I mean, no, because the civil drawings that are provided with this, with site plans, it's, they're like 30% drawings. Same thing with
Okay.
architectural.
Okay.
So, they're not doing the very detailed design at this stage. You can't, because it just,
But yet the
But
landscape
any-
plan's been approved based on this.
And that's the worry.
an
sometimes
engineer,
they
so-
do if there's like bedrock.
Okay,
Otherwise, I don't think so.
okay. So
um,
the problem is they're not doing their utility scans before they put those drawings together and then they buy the
Yes.
property and they do the utility scans. And I'm like, oh, what do you know? There's a water line.
Oh, so that's not a part of
Well-
the engineering drawing?
It is, they're supposed to show existing and proposed utilities on the civil drawings.
Okay.
They actually need to show them on the landscape drawings as well to show if there are any conflicts with landscaping. But sometimes they're wrong, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes, like you said, they go out and they do a better survey and they go, oops, actually, we made a mistake. And in fact, that happens on every single plan,
Yeah.
always. It just, and that's one of those conflicts.
But it's
One of the
never
things
in
that,
our favor.
but.
Oh, there
but-
could have been
but-
2 trees.
One of the things that we did recently, when we updated the standard conditions last year, one of the things we did, it used to be that post-approval, you had to submit your civil engineering plan prior to the issuance of your land development permit. I'm sorry, land disturbing activity permit.
Oh.
And then you submit your landscape plan at a later timing. What we did is we changed the timing and now they have to submit both at the same time.
Which is better.
So there's better coordination of those two plans. So it used to be, the civil people would identify a conflict, they'd resolve it, and by the time it got to Laura and others in my group that reviewed the landscape plans, it was already a done deal, and we just have to design the landscape around that. And so we changed it, so there's much better coordination,
That's good.
communication
That's good.
between Laura's group and the civil engineering group. So that's one of the things we've done to address that conflict, but that's just kind of inherent in.
So at a 30% drawing, you really can't, you can't know what you're gonna get. So, but at the time we are making the site plan approvals, we don't know what the right answer is.
We have a really good idea. Again, they have to provide a survey plan with the site plan drawings that show the location of existing utilities, and then they'll show where they're proposing new utilities and trees and site features and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And so those, in an ideal world, those would be worked out. We have our DES plan reviewers that are, they're almost the coordinators for the entire Department of Environmental Services. And they do a very extensive review pre-approval of the site plan drawings to try to identify all of those conflicts beforehand, but no one's ever perfect.
Right.
And I would even say, like, Colt, this is for me, Johnny, like, let's let Matt mess it up and redo 4.1, right? The way that
Yeah.
we think that, we'll have more of a coordinated response. Let's revisit this in a year and ask for that metric.
Yeah.
How many times is the environment shafted because of this, and how many times are we winning,
Mhm.
based on a year of site plans? Yeah.
So I did want to discuss a couple of the changes that we're going to make with the update to this document. The one thing is kind of following the counties, the county boards, I think the joining of the biophilic cities network. We've been doing a lot of work in trying to, I know we don't have any adopted policy at this time that implements that provides the objective for biophilic design and site plans. However, one of the things that we want to do in order to kind of spark the discussion at SPRC is to have developers submit with their site plan application a written narrative, can provide pictures too if they want, that goes through I think the 14 biophilic design and provide a narrative as to, which of these are they going to be implementing in this project and how are they doing it? And so that will be part of the application document. And so when we get to that item on the SPRC agenda, we can put that up on screen. The applicant can provide that in their presentation, say, here's how we're doing biophilia, and that will be a topic of conversation around the table.
If I can't, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I was gonna say, I think it would be great if that condition made reference to the soon-to-be final forestry and natural resources plan that has detailed design guidelines for this. County's history has been being
Yeah.
part of the Biophilic Cities Network for a while. We've kind of been late on actually writing down what that means.
And just to piggyback, I think that it's our responsibility at SPRCs to say, if you haven't already, please read our draft of the FNRP, which outlines the site design plans.
I think the problem is the design already exists when they come to SPRC, but if it's in the
It is
conditions
draft.
and it's part of that framework that they're starting with and it's written down in the administrative regulation, I think that's a much stronger message of
Well,
be thinking about this. from
So,
day one.
so the biophilic design narrative, that would just be part of the application. It's not intended to be regulatory, but it's intended to be for discussion purposes.
Sure.
Now, once the FNRP is approved, if it has specific design guidelines, we may look at our standard site plan conditions and look to see whether any changes or adjustments need to be made to our landscape plan condition to implement any
Okay.
of the recommendations from the FNRP.
I don't know where we push for this, but talk to what was it, the urban design team?
And Chris and Laura.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
And-
they had a long, they.
Well-
And that made it
Good
into the
presentation.
FNRP. We have
It
call
was very nice.
Yep.
But I think that the county and pretty much everybody is challenged with defining what biophilic design looks like and what that is and that, that's where you came up with the grocery store that had a green wall that was astroturf.
Right.
Okay, you have things like that. And it isn't until we learn things like that that we say, oh, we have to know to probe deeper, but we shouldn't have to know the details of how a green wall is designed to ferret out that that's not an acceptable design type. So I don't know where we go to say, these are our not biophilic design standards, but examples of proven biophilic designs.
Yeah.
I don't know what you,
And then-
exemplar.
It's in the FNRP.
Yeah, we have that.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, that's something that should be provided, I think, at the policy level.
Well,
It wasn't in the first draft, but in the second. draft.
Okay.
There's a
Like
full
4 or
call.
5 pages. like
Okay.
a
I think
call
that-
out box with photos of the
Okay.
actual project
Okay.
and some text.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Once we have the FNRP, that is our toolkit to me, for this discussion. But to Sarah's point, it does need to come before the SPRC.
Yeah, I mean, I think like once it is, you're right, it's policy, it doesn't have to come first. Once it is finalized, like putting that in the conditions, like a design narrative in alignment with the guidelines established.
And we already
in
have a
the FNRP, right? is,
so you're familiar
Thanks,
with the
sir.
presentation that Laura and Chris did. right?
Oh, yeah, I helped them on it.
Okay.
So Matt was probably here.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah, it was really good and everybody was very encouraged by it. And so, okay, so you
Yeah.
know about that. So that's how it's gonna play out in real life.
AKA, we're all super excited for you to rip up
Yeah,
4.1.
excited. I hope
So
that
that's
we
what
can,
ended up in the FNRP.
I hope that we can
Yeah,
deliver.
yeah.
Okay, good,
And
okay.
Ryan showed that at
Yeah,
the Energize
okay.
meeting. So the
Yeah,
latest draft of
okay,
the FNRP includes a little bit more robust stuff on.
I didn't know that.
And also just so that everyone's aware, we'll likely have another update on the FNRP at some point this fall. So you'll be able to see what's coming out of that plan once all of the work that's being done over the summer is being materialized as part of the fall's review.
Right, so our goal was to get it in just as the public comment period, our comments in,
That's right.
just as the public comment period started. Ryan will come back with the outcomes of that public comment period in the fall, which will include this stuff too. I think, yeah, all the stuff happening at the same time is good, basically, yeah.
So just on the conditions itself, so this is the main condition, I think, that governs the landscaping on the site, that this condition will even also govern the delivery of public spaces. Not totally, we have a separate sort of standard, non-standard condition that talks about process and design and things of that nature, but when those things are delivered, they're delivered through the final landscape plan. Standard condition 21 talks about what do you have to show. First of all, what is the timing what is the timing by which you have to submit your final landscape plan and have it approved by? What needs to be shown on the final landscape plan? And then when do you have to deliver these elements? So, but a couple of things to note, the interrelation between the conceptual landscape plan and the final landscape plan. Obviously, the final landscape plan is much more detailed, much more detailed. It will have very specific species of plantings, specific hardscape materials, specific site furnishings, rather than general, here's generally, we're going to put a bench. The final landscape plan will say, this is the brand of the bench that we are using, right? So
Including lighting and other
lighting,
measures as
exactly,
well.
all that kind of stuff. So it's much more, it is detailed. It is what's on the final landscape plan is what gets built. And so.
And approved.
And approved.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then again, like I said, it says for timing for delivery. So I put a little note here that said that, I think once the FNRP is adopted, we will then go back and take a look at the recommendations that are coming from that. And we'll determine then if there need to be any adjustments made to this condition to require new elements, such as I know one of the major recommendations that's going to come forth is a requirement for a percentage of native species.
Mhm.
And so that would be the type of thing that we would go back and refine our site plan condition to put that requirement in there on the final landscape plan.
And is that a county board? Does county board have to approve those changes, or is that a staff level decision?
The standard site plan conditions is it's an administrative document itself because so that would just be something that we would develop in consultation with the county manager's office.
Okay. So you could
but-
go ahead and do it now.
We could, but we wouldn't until the FNRP is approved
Okay.
or adopted.
Why?
Because we don't have the policy in place.
Okay.
But, so then
I see. Okay.
our last letter on this did go to the county manager, right?
Yes.
We addressed the county manager.
Mhm.
So assumingly, we should look towards end of summer if Matt is working hard.
I hope so.
right,
Depends on
another
how
letter.
soon we can get through all
Yeah,
the
yeah.
various
Or
layers
fall,
of
let's say
review.
fall.
Yeah. But we have a working draft, and we,
Can we see it?
probably not.
But can we
It's-
have
We
you
can make
back?
suggestions.
Yeah.
Can we have you back and then write a letter on it?
Sure,
Okay,
sure.
can we have him back in the fall and write a letter?
Yeah, we can
In
talk
the
about it.
early fall, take a month off.
So,
Okay, cool, thanks. Okay.
now I'm gonna shift gears, talk about SPRC. So, again, I think all of you know about SPRC. I think you've all come to meetings before and participated in the conversation. So just to review really quickly, SPRC is a standing committee of the Planning Commission, charged with facilitating the public review of site plan projects. So this is a relatively new thing, and we now have to have the Planning Commission adopt rosters for each individual project, but the standard list of organizations that are on the rosters for SPRC projects include, board-appointed commissions and committees, such as this commission, Forest Area Natural Resources Commission, and C2E2, among many others. And as I mentioned earlier, public space, landscaping, and biophilic design is a standard bullet point on the SPRC discussion agenda. So it's usually at the second meeting. First meeting, we usually will talk about site layout, building architecture, and then the second meeting will go into public space, landscaping, and biophilic design, transportation, all that stuff.
Art.
Yep. So, yeah.
One of the things that we see is we do get the landscape plan and we do get this. And what we're seeing is that the negotiated privately owned public space is in a backhanded way designed to be the entryway to the hotel. Or it's designed to set up kiosks in the summer for retail.
Yep.
So it's all of those things, and what we really end up with is a big concrete or a big, large impermeable surface area with trees saluting on each side like that as you go down the promenade. Is there anything we can do to negotiate not the space, but the space of permeable and impermeable surface?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that is a legitimate topic to raise at SPRC. And the appropriate way to do that is to come to the meeting and say, we've reviewed the materials and we think there is too much impervious surface in this element of this public space. It needs to be changed. And then, staff is there and we're writing that down, and we'll go back to the developer and say, how are you going to address this comment?
How does the stormwater utility factor into these designs? The fact that we're changing over to a stormwater utility, will that affect the commercial buildings? And they'll get a credit if they have less impermeable. What
is a question I do not know the answer to. I would need to go back and confer with our DES group. What I will say is that stormwater management, while we do get draft stormwater management plans with the site plan application. And so those are reviewed by DES and they're available for everybody to look at. Since stormwater management it's regulated by the Chesapeake ordinance.
Right.
So it's a code requirement.
Yeah.
So we typically don't get too far into the weeds in stormwater management at the site plan level because it is generally conceptual. And that's usually taken care of at, with the land disturbing activity permit and civil engineering plan. That's when they're reviewed for compliance versus the Chesapeake ordinance. Now, there are exceptions to that. Like I know there have been times where, there have been aspects of stormwater management that actually have impacted site design. Like for example, what's the project over by YMCA? The 11th Street development site. They had to build in a very large overland relief area, and so that became an integral part of the site design. And so that was discussed at SPRC, but generally it's not.
they had to in order to comply with Chesapeake Bay ordinance?
Yes.
And then going back to your earlier point, Colt, in terms of when to voice these opinions, or not opinions, but when to voice these concerns related to pervious versus impervious surface. I mean, I could speak to a few projects. I know for Crystal Plaza 1, I believe it was, and also Crystal Plaza 5, which we were involved as part of DPR. We also had those very same concerns when it came to, this is acting more of a hardscape promenade area instead of it being more integrated within the public space development. And if we are going to have a park easement or public access easement, what can we do here in order to make it more lively and more biophilic in nature? So that's one of the things that we certainly bring forward as part of our initial staff comments, but also within the site plan review committee process and review. We want members of the committee to raise those issues so that way when the developer hears them, they can come back with an updated rendering or an updated concept for what they would want to have to put forward. And usually we come up with something that's much better in terms of that impervious versus pervious.
I've always had trouble, I thought well, we had to think of what that was. We don't know. Yeah, we're not.
No, we don't know. No.
But it's, again, as Marco said, there's a staff review and then the SPRC review. Staff, we may be reading the policy very narrowly, but then the SPRC may come up with something like, hey, this is just common sense. There's way too much impervious surface here. Mm-hmm. And then, that helps us say, yeah, you're right. And we can go back to the applicant and say, how are you going to address this? And as Marco said, a lot of times they'll go back to the drawing board and come up with another concept. That will go from there.
So continue to ask stupid questions and point out the obvious. That's what we're supposed to do. Yeah. Good
questions. Here we are.
Yeah.
So just a very brief word on the review of site plans. So this is very topical for what we were just talking about. Staff, an interdepartmental group of staff is always involved in the review of site plans from our end. It's my team in CPHD planning are the project managers, so we're the coordinators. We're kind of the face of the project, but there are always staff from various departments that are involved in the review. So we have a DES planner that always is working on the project, a DPR planner, Vincent's group is always involved, real estate is always involved, AED is always involved. So it truly is an interdepartmental group that reviews these things. And we are, our primary starting point for the review of this is per our county codes and ordinances in conformance to adopted plans and policies. So I've heard a lot of good ideas here today. And what I would say to you is if it's something is important to you, it should be in the policy because that's what we're reviewing it against. And so just the last bullet here, this is really important. You can see the comprehensive plan wheel. We have a lot of different elements of our comprehensive plan. And so our recommendations in our negotiations with the developer and the eventual package that comes forth has to be a balance of all of these different elements of the comprehensive plan. And there are always policy conflicts. There always are in every site plan. Do we get more open space or do we get more housing? Or, there are all of these policy priorities. Our group will make a recommendation to Mark Schwartz, but ultimately it is Mark Schwartz's recommendation to the board. And so that's what comes forward.
I mean, one of the things, sorry, can I?
Go ahead.
I mean, one of the things that I've been wrestling with ever since I've been on this commission is how to calculate the trade-off between different county priorities and saving carbon or reducing carbon and so on. And I'm hoping that our new, what is his title, Trudy? The sustainability officer will help address that. And there is a little bit of information in the FNRP about how to calculate the value of trees and what those mean and so forth. But we have to calculate in stormwater issues and heat island effect. So I hope we get to the point in a few years where we're able to reasonably require a developer to come in with the calculation. What is the sustainability balancing that's going on here?
Value
We've got
of
some
ecosystem
costs, we've
services.
got some benefits,
Right.
and is it in balance? And, I hope that everybody here asks that question when we go to SPRCs.
But again, it is a balancing act because, our incentive zoning policy, our incentive zoning regime sort of puts, for the additional density and height that is requested through the site plan, we look for infrastructure and amenities to be provided in order to achieve that additional height and density. And so there is a dollar value, there, and, it has to be, by law, it has to be comparable, right? So, so I say that to say that there is a finite pool of stuff we can get for site plans. And so that has to be balanced across all of these different comprehensive plan elements. And maybe the county manager says, hey, I have a big need for a library right here. It could come at the expense of public space, or it could come at the expense of, hey, maybe you could have gotten, right, maybe you could have gotten, an additional 5 affordable housing units in the project. So
Educational campus that came into Penn Place, that's another one as well.
Yep, exactly.
So how does that factor in there? I mean, when is Mark Schwartz telling them, hey, we do library here? Or who, is anybody doing that?
That is part of staff's negotiation with the applicant during the process.
But I mean, who's telling staff we need a library?
Well, it is up to Mark to communicate those policy preferences to us to aid in our negotiations. But it is a topic at SPRC. So, but it's also guided by our adopted plans and policy.
That's right.
Like, for example, the Roslyn sector plan has, in the implementation section, has a page that says, here are the goals for delivery of infrastructure and amenities through the site plan process within this planning area, right? And so it'll list, some specific metrics. So that guides our negotiation, and then we will also work with Mark, and Mark may communicate, I need a library here.
That's our school's part.
Yeah.
Well, I would argue that I think that we haven't thus far and probably should ask for that same consideration to be put on the PSMP guidelines, which are looking for an exorbitant amount of open
Yeah.
space over a very short period of time that we are not meeting. And why shouldn't that be a consideration in the same weight as a fire station, right?
It absolutely
And
is.
also carbon emissions, you know,
Yeah.
carbon emissions have to be pumped up. I mean, pumped underground, I
Yeah.
don't know.
I don't know how we feel about sequestration, but.
But
Okay.
they need to be raised.
So moving on a little bit to the post-approval process, I said I was gonna spend some time on this because I think it's one of the things that is not necessarily a topic of public conversation very often. But just for everyone's edification, once you have your site plan entitlement approved, you can't just go ahead and build it. You need a whole bunch of permits and plans approved. So we have a post 4.1 plan, which is to capture everything if the board made changes on the dais, or the planning commission recommended changes that we didn't have time to slip sheet in the drawings that the board approved, that those get, worked into this post 4.1 plan that then becomes the master set that everything else is reviewed against. We have a tree protection plan, civil engineering plan, as we've talked about, maintenance of traffic plan, the final landscape plan, of course, a facade plan. And all of these plans go into much more fine-grained detail than what is approved with the site plan drawings. Now, as I'll talk about in a little bit, that doesn't mean you can make changes to the general concepts that were approved with the site plan. So there are very specific processes to go through if you are making changes. We also have land and building permits. So the way the conditions are administered is that, condition 5, the phasing plan, you have to get your phasing plan done prior to the issuance of the land disturbing and activity permit. So before we will give you your land disturbing and activity permit, you have to have met all of those conditions that are required to be met before then. So that's how basically they're administered. But there are a number of different permits that developers need to get in order to implement, to actually build these site plan projects. Going from demolition, excavation, your below grade structure, and then your above grade structure.
Man, is the facade plan, where does bird friendly glass come in? Is that the facade plan or is that an architectural plan? I mean, is that in the building glass itself? I don't know.
Yeah.
Which is glass a facade?
Yeah, it is. It is. So
Okay.
that would be reviewed per the facade plan. And Chris Kreider, who came to speak to this group, that's his job is reviewing those facade plans. Yep. And then finally, certificates of occupancy. And certificates of occupancy are issued by zoning. And basically, it is a piece of paper that says that you have met all county codes and requirements, including all site plan conditions, in order to occupy various components of the building. Final landscape plan review. So we talked about the conceptual landscape plan. So the final landscape plan, it is reviewed by an interdepartmental team, but Laura Schaub, who you met again, she is the county's landscape architect. And so she's the project manager for the review of all final landscape plans. Now, the final landscape plans get reviewed per condition 21. So if there was anything special that was appended to condition 21, Laura reviews it. And she also, there's this document, you can see this picture here, which we call collectively, it's a grouping of various different things. But we collectively call it the Arlington County Landscape Standards. It includes standards for landscaping that are pulled from the zoning ordinance. It also includes standards for planting and preservation of trees, recommended trees and invasive species list. So as I said, you don't have to tell us exactly what species you're proposing, with your conceptual landscape plan on the front end, but on the back end, you do have to tell us. And so Laura will review that and say, oh, you can't do that. That's an invasive species. And then we also have a landscape and tree preservation plan checklists that she will go through. And then finally, I add this bullet because it's important, but best planning and urban design practice. I mean, Laura's professional. She's a professional landscape architect. So she is reviewing this to make sure that it meets high standards. So changes to site plans post-approval. This is something that I get questions about all the time. So people are always asking me, why was this done this way? And why did we not see it? And how come it didn't come back to SPRC? What have you? We have 3 categories of changes that you can make to a site plan once it's approved. What we're calling a major amendment is when you are coming back and changing the plan by more than 5% of the total floor area of the building. So if you're coming back and you're increasing density by more than 5% of the approved GFA, that's going to be a major amendment. You have to come back to SPRC. If you got a office building approved and you want to change it to a residential building, you have to come back to SPRC. If your building height is changing, you have to come back to SPRC. If you are changing the site area used to calculate density, you have to come back to SPRC. Oops. Minor amendments. So a minor amendment does not need to go back to SPRC. A minor amendment is a change that does not meet any of those thresholds, but nonetheless may result in changes to density or building height or site area or parking or any of these development statistics that the board approved. So maybe you want to change your parking ratio and you got approved for 100 spaces, but now you think, actually, I don't need that many. I want to do 90 spaces. You have to come back to the board and get a minor amendment. And administrative changes. So staff has the ability through the zoning ordinance. It's actually the zoning administrator is the person who is, the zoning administrator is the person who has the ultimate authority on approving administrative changes. But the zoning administrator may make changes to an approved site plan as long as they do not impact any of the major development statistics. So no changes to density. You can't even add 1 additional square foot of GFA to a building without going back to the board. It has to be exactly the same amount of GFA approved by the board. You can't make any changes to parking, can't make any changes to height. And then those are the big ones, but also, and this is a very important point, but it's subtle and it's sort of could be, I think, viewed as subjective. But if let's say a developer comes back and he's not making any change, they're not making any changes to any of the development statistics. Those are all the same, but the building looks completely different. Technically, you may read the zoning ordinance, say that could be done administratively. However, here's where they get you. The spirit of the zoning ordinance and the intent of the county board in its approval of the site plan, general purpose of the comprehensive plan. If they come back with a totally different design building, we're going to make them get a minor amendment at the very least.
And actually, Max just brought up a really good point. Not just to the building, it also may be a consideration when it comes to anything that was approved as part of public space development too. So if there, an example being the Crossing Clarendon development that went through a few years ago and then was updated earlier this year. So again, that also went through the minor amendment process. That actually had conditions of approval way back in the late 90s when it was originally approved, where this commission, as well as potentially having, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure if it went back to the SPRC or not, but I know that there was more of a public review related to that as well, where there needed to be that level of consideration before the new design for that public space could be considered by the county board.
Right, exactly. So that falls under this second bullet category where you have made changes that, yeah, you're not changing any of the development statistics, but you've made a change such that you're no longer sort of, it's a change that we believe that is substantive enough that it needs to go back and be, approved by the board specifically because it's out of the spirit of the board's approval of the site plan.
Are the,
So
are
go
the,
ahead.
are the decisions of the zoning administrator
Mhm.
publicly available? And could the public ever?
The public can appeal an official determination of the zoning administrator.
Okay.
Generally speaking, something like this is not going to be an official determination. It will be something that the zoning administrator and staff, planning staff,
Right.
or DPR staff will all talk about and arrive at a decision.
Now, there is a zoning determination letter process. I know that the zoning administrator does undertake. And then that obviously takes a lot of review and time in order to figure out exactly what that determination will be. I believe that may be appealable.
And the zoning administrator is a county employee,
Yes,
That's correct.
not a political.
No.
correct.
And not a commission.
And then they also make recommendations to the Board of Zoning Appeals, which is another group that's within the county.
That's a county, that's a political.
That's actually, believe it or not, supported. The Board of Zoning Appeals is appointed by the Circuit Court.
Court.
Yes.
Okay.
Nothing judges control.
Absolutely, and they get to second guess the zoning administrator.
Yeah.
But the zoning administrator actually does have powers that are given to her by the state constitution.
Oh, okay.
That, like, for example, she can make a determination on something, and even Mark Schwartz couldn't tell her to. Mark Schwartz might say, "I don't like that, change it," and Arlova can say, "Sorry, I'm the zoning administrator, and I get to make this decision."
Well, I was wondering, because it
Yeah.
sounded like she had quite a lot of authority, so
She
that
does.
comes straight
She
out of
does.
the state law.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
State constitution.
I don't know about the Constitution, but
That's
state
what I
law.
wrote down. Okay.
Yeah. So I was going to give an example. Oops, going back to the slide, I was just going to give an example and just talk a little bit about process. So a good example of this dynamic in play is right now we have a minor site plan amendment that has been submitted to us for the Crystal Houses site. We had a site plan approved there in 2019 that I actually personally worked on. But now, there have been a lot of changes in the ownership now. Washington Housing Conservancy owns the land, and they're going to develop it as an affordable housing project. APA has been commissioned to develop the site, and so they're delivering an affordable housing product. So one of the buildings they're in for a minor amendment, and what they've submitted, they're increasing density, so that's going to be a minor amendment. It's below the threshold of 5%, so they don't need to be a minor amendment. It doesn't need to be a major amendment, so they won't need to go back to SPRC. The building looks completely different than what was approved by the board. And there are a lot of elements that are different about the way the building functions, the way it relates to the street, the urban design, the landscaping, all that kind of stuff. So what we're going to do, because, we don't do this for every minor amendment, but those that involve new construction, those that we think that, the public has an interest in weighing in, we're going to hold a special meeting, and that's going to be set up probably in the fall sometime. We're going to hold a special meeting to have the applicant introduce the changes to a group of, the community, essentially, to review what the changes are, and we're going to solicit comments and take those back. And so for those, for the minor amendment, for those meetings, it's our standard to kind of we'll invite the SPRC chair that chaired the project. So in this case, it was Jim Lantelmi. So we'll invite Jim, and then we'll invite, to the extent, we'll take a look at the SPRC list and the various commissions, committees that participated, and we'll invite those as warranted. So for example, there were major changes to, trying to think, there are some changes to the streetscape. So we'll invite Pam Van Hine because she was the pedestrian advisory committee member that worked on the site plan. So we'll invite her to the meeting to look at the changes. So it's those types of lists that we'll put together. We'll also obviously invite the civic associations to take a look at it and everything. So it's not quite SPRC, but it is going to give the community a chance to review that minor amendment and provide some input.
And just so I'm still understanding, the county board has to approve a minor amendment.
Yes, that's correct.
So it's still possible for other people to.
Yeah, we write
Absolutely.
letters.
Yep.
Yeah, we write
Absolutely.
letters on minor.
Absolutely.
How does
And
the
major
public-
amendments too.
So that's how the public keeps track of who's filed a major and minor amendment.
Right.
But how does the public keep track of administrative changes? Is that anywhere visible?
I think we do publish those on our webpage. I couldn't point you to a specific page right now, but that's something I could look into and get back to the group on.
Okay.
But again, keep in mind, the types of changes that we would consider for an administrative change would be like, for example, hey, the location of this tree moved 2 feet to the west, or, this path we said it was going to be like this gauge gravel, it's actually going to be a different gauge gravel, or now it winds this way a little bit. They're minor changes, right?
But it's still within the spirit of whatever's been approved post-approval.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but, and it's up to us in consultation with the zoning administrator to determine, hey, collectively, do all these changes have a really big impact? And now is this not within the spirit of the board's approval? And if it's not, then this is going to be a minor amendment.
And now it's a dog park.
Right. So if
Not, it is.
So if you had an urban orchard or something approved with a site plan, and then all of a sudden now it's gonna be a dog park,
Right.
we would look at that and say, no way, that's a minor amendment. So, okay,
It's a good segue.
good segue into public space processes and site plans. So I'll turn it over to Marco.
Well, thank you, Matt. So I think a lot of the
Thank you.
points that was just discussed by Matt and by the rest of our group here, we've touched upon a lot of it, but I'll just go ahead and talk through a little bit of what we do in terms of public space development and how that's also influenced by the site plan review process, whether it be concurrently with the site plan or post-approval. So as Matt mentioned earlier, in terms of our guidance, there are various plans that we look to for guidance as we move forward with public space development. One, of course, is the Public Spaces Master Plan, which was adopted 4 years ago, which looks into a lot of different elements. Actually, I can speak to priority action 1.59 within the plan, which details that park master plans should be developed for all new parks or when renovation of existing parks require any major rearrangement of park amenities. So again, that's one element that we use in order to come forward with a new plan for a public space, whether it be through the park master planning process, or again, as I mentioned earlier, it may be also defined as part of the site plan review process. Some of the elements that are referenced within the PSMP, again, level of service maps, access maps, trying to see exactly what's there on site now, county-wide, but also within that particular area, and then where those needs are for particular uses, treatments, things like that. And then there are design guidelines for privately owned public spaces that are referenced within the PSMP. As well as the PSMP, we also have, of course, what's being worked on now for the Forestry and Natural Resources Plan, which is currently known as the Urban Forest Master Plan. So again, detailing long-term goals for tree canopy, strategies and priorities to address that in a comprehensive and systemic manner. But also now with this new update, we're talking through conservation, climate mitigation measures, adaptation, resilience, biodiversity, and then all of that can be included as part of the review and also be part of this FNRP plan update. So again, I don't have the specific updates right now, but I know Ryan will be coming back to our commission in the fall to address a lot of these points further. As well as that, we also have our individual land use plans and studies. So again, we have our sector plans. Some examples, of course, our recently adopted Pentagon City Sector Plan, Roslyn, Clarendon, Crystal City Sector Plan, which is one of our larger ones as well. Our various club studies, which look into so many of the different aspects within urban development. So we talk through land use development within these sector plans and guidance, public space, building design, transportation, historic preservation, you name it. So there's a whole bunch of different elements that are prescribed. But not only that, when it comes to the public space development, there may also be guidance within specific public spaces that are provided within the plan. So I can, for example, the Crystal City Sector Plan has 26 public spaces that are identified within that plan area. However, we just don't look at it as part of just the context of one particular public space. Let's say if there's a site plan and that site plan calls for the development of a particular park, park number 1 or park number 3, whatever the case may be. We look at it from that lens and within the guidance that's provided within that sector plan, but also what are the other public spaces that may be affected by that development, and how can we provide the best connectivity, the best access, the best interrelationship amongst the various public spaces that are prescribed within those plans. So that's essentially what we do in terms of our work when we look at the various public spaces that are put forward, specifically how they relate to specific public spaces within a certain site plan, but also how it relates overall.
So
Yes.
I guess just in relation to that, if it's just framing a question of like, when we have that circumstance where there may be a lot of connected properties representing a space, I'm even thinking about the fire station issue, that background and things like that. Is that also, you guys are working to help develop the prioritization of which SPRCs come first and which come second? Is that something that is also?
So in terms of how it's being discussed, like the different topics?
Yeah, I mean, like, why did we, I just want to know, like, how did we decide on the staging of Penn Place versus like starting with the Helix building? Like, why didn't we just start with the Helix building or something like that, you know?
The specific SPRC agenda is developed by the SPRC chair. So that's always a member of the planning commission. They'll look to us to provide guidance, but ultimately they have the decision.
And that's another big moment where we should also weigh in on things like, I think our point of view would be to get the biggest swath of public land space to SPRC first, so it anchors that, community or that joining of properties to that. Whereas maybe the planning commissions who's setting the SPRC agenda may focus on the largest building or something like that. We should advocate potentially to Elizabeth Guerin, to Tenley, to all these folks on that.
And then also as part of the guidance, one thing that we've talked about a lot as part of this commission as well is land acquisition opportunities. So where there are opportunities within either within a private development project or something of that nature, where there can be potential opportunities to expand our public spaces either through privately owned public space opportunities or incorporation within existing park spaces. I know there are a few site plans that have dealt with that before, and that will continue to be dealing with that in the future as well, especially within the Pentagon City and Crystal City areas. So those are things to think about as well when we move forward with our development of our public spaces and what we use in order to, guide those spaces. That next slide, please. Sure.
And that's obviously one, guys, that we should always be hearing on. In the first 3 years of the 5-year PSMP, we're trying to get 10 acres of new land acquisition. We're at 0.3 acres. So every time we need to start yelling about it, we finally got it in to the PSMP, we now have to yell about it. So they have to meet that goal. How are they going to meet it? We don't know.
Right. And, that's definitely part of the process that we have to, dictate moving forward is, where do we find these opportunities within the existing site plan projects or within other projects in order to fulfill those goals? And we have to be very prescriptive and also very, not, I don't want to use the word forceful, but very persistent when it comes to advocating for those opportunities. When it comes to public spaces through site plans, there are a few ways in which we review them within the county. So again, site plans are guided by comprehensive plans and other sector plans. I mentioned the various sector plans earlier, the GLUP and other area plans that are provided. Future land uses are envisioned for when redevelopment occurs, and that may include the creation of new public spaces within those plans. So one example of where we find for further opportunities within a sector plan, because the Crystal City sector plan does call for new opportunities to create public spaces that may not have been previously identified, is the Arlington Junction Park area, for example. That was not an area that was called out as part of public space development originally within the sector plan, but again, through the various processes, what happened with the streetcar initiative and what was decided as part of what this land could be used for in the future, priorities within the PSMP amongst other planning documents, it was determined that a public space would be the best use for that site. And that was also dictated as part of a post-approval process that the county board went through by creating a park master plan for that park area. So again, it's not just spaces that are already prescribed in plans, but also opportunities for which we can find new public spaces within existing planning documents. Again, that's the middle example that's shown here on this slide. And sometimes we have planning efforts that are done concurrently with the site plan. So one example being the Crystal Plaza 1 project, where we had a pedestrian access area where there were park-like amenities provided. So we did have the SPRC look at the makeup of that space. Again, to Colt's point earlier, there was an issue related to the hardscape versus what's permeable, what was impermeable within that particular project. So there was a lot of conversation both at the staff level, but also at the SPRC level for improving that condition, but also activation. So what kind of spaces or what kind of amenities and uses could be put in place in order for that space to be more activated for the community and look less like, as you were saying earlier, window dressing for a particular office space or residential building. So again, some of that process or some of that work does come concurrently with the SPRC. Or again, and I will mention this in more detail, the park master planning process and what that entails. Again, public spaces are also achieved through land conveyance. So again, this could be through easements, whether it be park easements or public access easements, depending on what's called out, potentially within our sector plans or also within the PSMP. And that could also be negotiated as part of the site plan review package. I guess site mitigation measures is what we call them right now. So as part of that, the package that developers can request additional density for, I mean, it could be for anything related to, again, we were talking about affordable housing. It could be for transportation improvements, stormwater, public spaces, things of that nature. And then when the developer opts to make a monetary contribution for public spaces, that contribution can go for the future development of public spaces within the area, but also potentially within the general area in which it would be affected. So, for example, within the Crystal City sector plan, again, we have 26 areas that are identified within that plan. However, because of certain timing issues, phasing, what's called out even also within our capital improvement plan, which is another document that our county board uses for the creation of our public spaces as well. There may be those competing interests where we would want to use that money and have the flexibility to use that money to develop public spaces ahead of what is being called out for within a particular site plan. So a lot of that is, again, dictated by what is said within the CIP, the negotiation process as part of the site plan review, and what can be done in terms of just the timing and the phasing for certain projects.
Marco, how we do get notified that these meetings are coming up and that participation is requested. But I'd say that we're probably overwhelmed by those requests for participation. How do we know as a commission which ones would provide more opportunities to achieve some of these privately owned public space?
Right.
How can we, can we be guided and say, hey, this is one we should look at? And how do we know that?
Yes.
Just to say like current state, in general, I do care about that flavor because we're overwhelmed.
No,
And Marco generally tells us which ones are serious and needing us and which ones are, it'd be nice to yell about invasives. You know, that's like probably where you're gonna get to. That's the informal process, right?
And the good thing is we do have very consistent coordination amongst our park development division, where we speak with Walter Gonzalez, who's our associate planner, who does the coordination of site plan review within our department. But then he also then conveys, the needs, the preliminary comments on certain projects back to our CPHD staff, who then provide us any updates related to what's being proposed for any particular site plan moving forward. So if there is a big call out for a potential public space development, then that comes back to us, and then I will relay that back to the PRC, either as part of a staff report or an email or something within the meeting that at least it's made public at
The
that
other
point.
inroad that we have, and it's just like adding to our responsibility, is to continue to build inroads with the planning commissioners
Right.
themselves. I think that I've gotten like, when I don't get it, or when Marco tells us, I additionally get secret little advice from, again, I'm gonna point out Elizabeth Guerin and Tenley Peterson, and other planning commission members who have the background that we don't, to be able to know what's secretly going to come up or what potentially we should hammer in on if it's not evident in that site
Mhm.
plan.
And
I think
another,
that's
Hard to know where to focus.
and another point I wanted to mention, just so that doesn't escape my mind, with Crystal City in particular, but I know it's something that we're trying to do for other areas as well. Sometimes as part of the condition language, we do want to also embed the flexibility to use potential funding for other public spaces within the general area of a sector plan or of a land use plan area, for the very reasons that I mentioned earlier in terms of prioritization, in terms of what's called out within the CIP, and then other guidance that potentially, county manager's office may be providing, or even the board. So at least having that level of flexibility is something that we are looking into more and more as we move forward with our projects and as we develop our site plan conditions, the specific ones that deal with public space development in particular.
So
Yes,
it's the case that there is no process now where a developer would be asked to contribute to, I mean, just something similar to the tree canopy fund, but let's just call it the park buying fund.
No.
Something like that. In
there-
other
there
words,
are-
if they can't put a park on site, they can't pay into some fund that gets used.
A land acquisition fund.
There you go.
That's a very complicated legal
Yeah,
issue.
okay.
So we have the authority under the state code of Virginia to do incentive zoning. So for example, we could do, and we do this all the time, we can ask for a cash contribution for, let's say $1.5 million for park planning within the Roslyn Coordinated Redevelopment Area, because, look, we were gonna ask for open space anyway. The Roslyn sector plan identifies open spaces in certain locations. Well, you wanted to develop a site that was not identified in the plan as a location for open space. So instead, we're just gonna get money from you for planning of, let's say,
Gateway Park.
Gateway
Yeah.
Park, right? Now, that's completely legal because that comes under the umbrella of incentive zoning, right? What's
Well, once you
probably
get
not
out into-
legal
yeah, once you get out
is
into the-
us saying, give us $1.5 million and we'll use that in some unspecified time period countywide to maybe acquire some land at some point.
I mean,
That's
but it's a
not
good
legal.
question, Jill, then how do we get to our 10 acres? How do we get there? Yeah.
How is the affordable housing contributions, how are those different? Because,
That's something that is enabled by state legislation.
I see, okay.
Separate.
Oh.
So we need.
We have an
to
affordable
have
housing
regulation
investment
on-
We have an affordable housing investment fund.
That
That
Oh,
we can take,
interesting.
yes.
Because then with affordable housing, they can either do units on site or they can give an AHIF cash
Yeah.
contribution, which seems the same thing as this land acquisition thing, but that's a state
Yes.
approval that has been granted specifically.
Maybe we should
That's-
create a open space or parkland investment.
Well, every year, the county manager comes to us with legislative priorities, and I throw out some
Thank you.
silly ideas. And potentially we can put out this as a silly idea. I think that's a silly idea I will
We
make.
have a precedent, why is it silly?
It's not, it's, because we have no climate legislation in Virginia, that's why it's silly.
Goes along with the dumb question.
Sorry, yeah. We have no climate legislation, that's why I'm worried, but
So
yeah.
Shruti, that's exactly what I was gonna mention, is that there is that
Yeah.
opportunity, right?
Yeah,
to
let's
provide
remember
that.
this if I forget.
Yep.
Okay,
Every year
so
they
but
ask
right
us
now
around
we're stuck with
September.
incentive zoning.
Yeah,
So the incentive has to be materially related to. the-
Yes, there has to be
Needs to be a state-
if you go
Yeah.
to a land use law course, you learn.
As Max mentioned too, Virginia being a Dillon rule state, that's exactly how, there would be a big impact in how that process would work. So thank you, Max, for that.
Exactly.
Just one other thing I wanted to say to Colt's question about like how do we keep all these SPRCs in track? An advertisement earlier this year, planning department came out with that one website's one-stop shop of all the active, past, current SPRCs, and I have that bookmark because I regularly look at it to just check like, are there ones that we're not participating in that I care about, or do I know the lay of the land of like anything going on around the one that we are participating in and stuff like that. And I think they worked really hard to get us that resource, and it is useful from that perspective to know like what's going on basically.
Next slide, for sure. And then finally, when it comes to the steps that we take for public space development, again, there are opportunities in which we do it concurrently with the SPRC. In other cases, we do have park master planning efforts in which we initially look at the various plans and policies, the levels of services, anything that we would need to look at, existing conditions. Maybe there is already an existing park and we have to, take an inventory of what's there now and what may need to be replaced, what may not need to be replaced, things like that. So we go through that exercise, and then of course we then engage with the community. So as part of our first engagement opportunity, we provide that information, but then potentially various concepts for how this public space could look like. So we do that either virtually, in person, or both. During the pandemic, we moved to an all virtual format. And, I know this specifically with Met Park when we had our first in-person meeting, but then we quickly needed to move to the virtual format to provide that opportunity for community feedback. But it doesn't mean that we're just abandoning one over the other. We may do a mix and match of both, given what we're doing moving forward. So again, we engage with the community, and within that, within those measures, we oftentimes have an online engagement opportunity, surveys, other way of saying that as well, in order to gauge the interest from the community, not just the community, but also our various commissions, this commission, the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission, amongst others, to solicit that feedback. But again, if this process is done concurrently with the SPRC, we also may move to present certain items directly to the civic associations as well. So that is a common practice as well. Once that first engagement concludes, and once we receive the information from that first engagement, we review all of that internally. We develop one final concept plan, sometimes two if we decide to have a third engagement opportunity, but typically it's a 1-2 process where we have that one final design concept. We take that as part of a second engagement opportunity, again, with the community, with the various commissions, to describe exactly what's been changed, what is being considered as part of this new public space development. And then we solicit feedback that way that could then be, again, processed and refined further as we then take that final plan or that final draft plan back to the commissions, whether it be back to this commission, the PRC, especially if it's as part of a site plan review process, the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission. We also sometimes may go to other committees, the C2E2, I believe now is what it's called, and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, amongst others. So that would be the opportunity to bring their feedback in prior to then going to the county board for adoption. So we compile all of that final concept plan. If it is within a DPR-led process, we then have a larger park master planning document, design guidelines that go along with that, and then that all is presented moving forward as part of a larger package to the county board. And again, this commission, the FNRC, would certainly be the two commissions that would review that package prior to the county board as well. And I believe that is the end of our presentation.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you guys.
Awesome. This was so helpful.
I want to open it up since we've been talking real quick to the folks on the phone. I see Mia is on, Dean is on, Gerald is on. Does anyone have any questions on the line? And then we can do another round robin of any lingering questions in the room as well. And I have some for you too, Matt. Okay, I'll kick us off. All right, so next steps. FNRP in the fall as our first item. 4.1 changes closely after, so that's our next. It would be great if we could have a presentation from Matt again before we write a letter on his proposed changes to the 4.1 to the county manager. Because we will do that,
Yes.
because we want it to include these things.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
and if you can't make it a presentation, that's totally fine. We
Yeah.
will definitely be writing a letter.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Let me go back and talk to my leadership.
Yeah,
And
no.
we'll give you
This
advice.
isn't
I'll
a
go through
question, but I'm
Marco
saying
and
this
we'll
thing.
go through the best channels to make that happen.
All
Yeah,
right,
but I do have that noted.
thank you, yeah. So I just wanted to get that clear. Obviously, this presentation is available to us. I think this is gonna be increasingly useful for SPRCs. I appreciate the overview. Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else have any questions for Matt on any SPRC things, planning commission activities, planning staff things?
Thank you for your time.
I know, yeah, this has been really
I
valuable.
still thought this is a very important topic.
I just think,
Appreciate you staying an hour and.
Yeah.
And for letting us pass you a question while
we only do it to staff, right? No, I think, we all agree, this is a huge function of this commission. That's not a side project. And it's something that when we all came onto this commission, we make it really clear that this is what we need to hammer in on. And we don't have a lot of otherwise coordination with the planning commission, so it's really important for us to hear from staff. And so thank you so much.
Absolutely.
We love
my
having
pleasure.
you here, so thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, Marco.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, okay, let's move on. We only have a couple more things. Next up for staff agenda,
Yes.
Marco and I talked earlier today. I just want to remind, so we have Melissa, we'll actually have 3 people on the planning commission or on the Parks and Rec Commission who will be leading the Bill Thomas Award.
Mhm.
Specifically, that's what we're going to talk about. So Melissa, Nelson, and Alex are going to be our representatives doing the adjudication from our commission side. But Marco's going to give a little overview of the timelines and everything for the coordination of the full committee who does the adjudication, which is not just Parks and Rec
Right.
Commission, the schedule for adjudicating, and then the party, of course.
So we have some really good news. We've been making a lot of strides internally within our comms team to figure out exactly what we're going to do in order to celebrate the recipients of the Bill Thomas Award, and not just for 2022. So we're also thinking about 2020 and 2021. So in terms of the review of the 2022 awardee, as Shruti had mentioned, we have Alex, we have Nelson, and we have Melissa that will be working through that. But also we will have 2 additional members of that committee. Right now, our comms team staff person working through that, Shalika, is identifying who those people may be. One person will be from staff. We're thinking at this point, someone from our Parks and Natural Resources division. The reason why being the last 2 years or so, I believe the staff representative was from our Park Development division. So just trying to mix it up in terms of the various divisions within DPR to see, various perspectives and figuring out who may be the best candidate for that. So we're moving forward with trying to find out who the best candidate would be within that particular division. As well as someone from the community, which our initial thoughts were a previous recipient of the award, maybe a reviewer within the committee. So
At first, but I think that'd be cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that this may be, so these are some of the things that we're thinking about right now. I believe staff person that's working on this right now is on vacation, but once she does come back, we'll have a larger update that I can share with the group, and especially with Melissa and with Nelson and with Alex prior to the end of this month. And then through the month of
I
August.
just have a quick,
Sure.
just comment on the staff involvement.
Mhm.
We are treating the Bill Thomas Award as like, if this is the hallmark thing that we do as our commission. And so the representatives, we try and pick people who are new and who also are excited about it, because it's like a fun thing to have to adjudicate and then plan.
Right.
Is there any way for us to make the recommendation that the staff person is picked similarly? I don't know, like a fun, not that they are fun, but that this is the fun thing for them to join.
Actually, Shruti, there is someone in mind who who we believe may be very interested in this award. So we're already thinking about that.
Who?
I can't say publicly at this point, but
We're
we
in a
know,
recorded meeting.
we know that we have someone on staff that has talked about
Okay,
just
cool.
their interest in participating, so.
Just saying, it's not an edict, but just saying, yeah, it'd be nice, okay.
So again, just to go back, so we'll be, the plan is to move forward in August into September with the review committee, providing a recommendation for the awardee. And then hopefully by the September/October PRC meeting, we will have someone identified. And then we're also thinking, another person within our comms team is working with the county board office to schedule an in-person reception, but also ceremony within the county board meeting sometime in October or November of this year. So it's all coming to a head within the next several months. We're thinking potentially having the reception within the 311 space that's right across from the boardroom. Maybe someplace outside if weather permits as well. That may be an option as well. But we're thinking through the various options in terms of what may be considered for that reception. And again, it would just not be to celebrate the 2022 awardee. It would be to celebrate 2020, 2021, friends, family, loved ones, whomever it may be. So once we have more information from our comms team, I will certainly relay that to the committee, but also to the larger PRC group. I may even have a small update to share during actually, I'll get into this too, during our walkthrough of Alcova Heights Park next month. So our field trip again is in August 15th. We'll be meeting at 6 p.m. At the intersection, I believe it's of 8th Street South and George Mason Drive, where the entrance to the park is.
So just before we leave Bill Thomas Award.
Yes.
So the important dates for you three, adjudication, August to September, with a decision made that we will vote on by the September
Right.
PRC meeting. So the way it kind of works, and Melissa can talk you guys through it, but the way it kind of works is you guys will jump on a call. You'll review the applications, do your own scoring. We have like a nice little scoring sheet that I made maybe like 6 years ago now. And then you'll meet on a call, discuss, make sure we all agree with the staff person and the community member as well. And then you'll make that formal recommendation as a letter. And then we'll talk about it at the September PRC meeting. Vote. It's a voting thing, which we will take your recommendation. So we will vote yes for it. And then we write a letter to the board on that recommendation. Mark and I have been talking about with this planning of the party, for either our preference would be for the October board meeting.
Right.
And it generally would happen right before the board meeting.
So it would happen, actually,
During
it
it.
would be during the board meeting,
And then the party- and
during
the celebration
the,
after.
specifically during the recess board meeting.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
But if it does happen in November, we're okay. I'm just
Yeah.
voicing, we're okay with that because it's still before
That's
Thanksgiving.
right.
The October board meeting, recess meeting, and the November recess meeting are actually like 2 weeks apart, so it's not that big of a deal. So just putting that on all of us. We're gonna invite, well, we already have invited everyone. And so like friends and families.
Is there a space big enough?
I don't care. Listen, it's a public meeting.
Well, 311 will be big enough for sure. That's a pretty
Yeah.
big conference room that we can use for the reception. And
More the merrier.
if we see that the weather's nice, maybe we might pull an audible and just do it outside. So we're talking through the various options with our comms team right now.
To me, it's that the reason I say that, I'm not being flippant, is that we haven't had one for 3 years. Let's show that we can get a mass of people in person. That way they fund a big party for us every year, basically is what I'm saying. No, for the recipient. Yeah.
Okay, you guys.
I know. And I would also just ask that like during that time, Melissa will like give actually a handshake, nice like to the and a small little speech to the awardee that we end up awarding for 2022. So that would be nice too. So yeah, that's just outlook for Bill Thomas Award. This half of the year is coming up.
So yes, so that is the Bill Thomas Award. I can even get into the August meeting. if
Yeah,
you'd
let's
like
do
me
it.
to.
So big thing there, guys. We're meeting at 6 p.m.
Yes.
instead of 7 p.m. And it'll only be about an hour. So if you remember from last year, we'll end around 7:30 or something like that. So we can get maximized daylight hours. Potentially, if you guys are down, we can like grab a drink or a meal afterwards, like we did last time. Hang out for a second, since we'll be close by to bars and restaurants anyways.
And in terms of logistical things and participants, so it's not just the PRC, we've also invited Takis as well.
Yeah.
He'll be
Confirm. And
He'll be
Jane.
there, as well as Jane, as well as members of the Energec. So we'll have all of those folks join us, and hopefully it'll be a weather permitting, a really great.
Also invited Peter, so like this is another more than merrier event, next mission meeting. And the only agenda item is gonna be voting on the minutes, approving the minutes.
Voting on the minutes. If there is public comment, we'll also
Yeah.
have that as well. But then after that, it'll be the one.
Yeah, so 6 PM, not 7 PM.
That's right.
We've put the coordinates of where we're gonna meet at the park itself, which I think will be fine.
Yes.
I just wanna mention on other business, since we're moving to the agenda, real quick. So we are gonna write an ARVA letter. That's the only letter coming up. It'll be short and sweet, basically just saying we're looking forward to the master planning process. And we'll send that out. I'd say just go ahead and send that full commission. We'll get edits on it. I'll put it on the letterhead and send that out pretty quickly, because I don't think it's gonna be wordsmithy at all.
Right, or
Yeah.
controversial.
Right, so if you want to send it to full commission, and then I can put the final in the PDF thing, that should be good. And that's the only letter. We really pumped it out last month.
Got five.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have that capacity now, which I feel good about, but I'm grateful for the, I know, I'm grateful for the break for the next 2 months. So thank you all for your help in reviewing and writing. Really appreciate it.
I have no other items on our agenda, and no other updates related to the staff report, so.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us. We'll go ahead and close and our recording. And we'll see you all at Alcova Park on August 15th.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank everyone online as well.
Just 2 minutes with you two.
Thank you and good evening.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, yes, you can leave them over there.
I can't be responsible.
These are so nice.
Okay, so